You're listening to the Wired for Impact podcast.
Welcome to the Wired for Impact podcast. This is Peter King, and I have a very exciting guest today. His name is Cal Washington. Cal is somebody that I came across when I started going down the rabbit hole of this entangled corporation mess that we're finding ourselves in. I've done some podcasts with some other people in this space. If you're interested, if you're a listener and you're interested in understanding more about whether or not the United States is a corporation, I encourage you to go listen to those other episodes. But the reason why I wanted to have Cal on today was because one of the biggest ahas I had that really turned the light switch on for me and allowed me to really understand what's happening is a snippet of a larger video that you did that explains jurisdiction. And I'm going to give a brief overview for those that are listening that may not be as intimate and understanding of all this, and not as far down the rabbit hole as perhaps I am, and certainly not as far as you are, so that we can get to some real practical things that people can do so that we're not wasting our time hearing more about your story, which, by the way, is fascinating for those that are listening. I highly encourage you to go check out Cal Washington's story because it really does explain. We'll get into it a little bit, but I don't want to necessarily take up the whole time doing that. So first and foremost, thank you for joining me today. This is going to be an exciting call.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Excellent. So I'm going to give you my understanding of the quick overview, and you correct me if there's anything wrong or if there's something that I missed, because I feel like you understand this at a level that I don't quite yet. So it's my understanding that after the Revolutionary War, the Americans were granted essentially, or we fought and got jurisdiction over the land. The Constitution was created under a common law jurisdiction, which is essentially no victim, no crime. And I think, if I understand correctly, that there was a meeting between the king and the Pope during the Treaty of Verona, where they said, hey, those pesky Americans, we don't have jurisdiction over them anymore. How do we infiltrate and how do we kind of get back? Because it's this unique experience of the American experience. They actually genuinely have true liberty. And we don't like that. We're monarchs. We want to have our control over them. So they essentially infiltrated via corporate/legal jurisdiction. And the way that I think about it is, if America was created with a constitution under common law, it's almost like they took a admiralty law net and threw it over and just kind of scooped us all up into this big net, and we got all entangled in its net. So when I came across your video, there's a video out there where you explain jurisdictions in such a beautiful manner where you give visual context. Can you quickly explain that Walmart jurisdiction example so the listeners understand what we mean when we're talking about jurisdiction and how important that is to understanding this whole entangled matrix that we're in?
Yeah, so without the visual here, I'll just explain it. So there's a point, just a single point, and that's you, and there's nothing else around you. Then you have decided to work at Walmart. And so you go to the Walmart manager in the automotive department, and he agrees to hire you. You agree to work there. And so you're giving up some of your freedom to go to Walmart, and then he will give you this stuff called money. So you put in hours and he gives you money. So you're giving up some of your freedom. You got to get that concept. When you're at Walmart, you're under the rules of Walmart, and you have to conduct yourself according to what you're told what to do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you've given up some of your freedom. So I want to just repeat that. That's the concept. And we all do it. We just don't think about it. So that's the simplest way to do it. And so if the manager in the automotive department tells you to come on a Sunday night at 3 a.m. and put boxes into an unmarked car, you would go, I think this is against the rules of Walmart. I'm not supposed to be there, and we're not supposed to be putting stuff into an unmarked car. So even though that's your manager and you agree to follow his instructions, there is a higher jurisdiction above him, which is the Walmart store itself, that has policies about coming on Sunday nights and putting stuff in unmarked cars. So you could appeal to that higher jurisdiction to say, I think there's something wrong with my agreement down here. The Walmart store is in Detroit or whatever. So Walmart, when it goes to put its stores in any city or town, has to abide by the rules of that town. And when I grew up in a small city. The mayor owned a department store, and so in that town, he wanted to give his staff 2 days off, so he gave them Sunday and Monday. He said nothing can be open on a Monday in that town. That was a rule of the town. So it didn't matter how big of a corporation you were, a large bank or a large grocery store chain, you were not allowed to be open in that town. So Walmart has to agree to all these different cities, their bylaws, when you can be open and when you can't be open, all that kind of stuff. So Detroit is a corporation as well, and it's inside of Michigan, which is also a corporation. So Detroit is subject to certain rules of Michigan, and there's crossover there, but it's just this concept. So everything is captured by the jurisdiction above it. A lower jurisdiction cannot supersede a higher jurisdiction. So Michigan is inside of what's called the United States of America, and it's a corporation. So Michigan has, and again, some rules Michigan supersedes it, and other rules they don't, but it's captured by this agreement with this corporation called the United States of America. That corporation is inside of the common law entity, the actual Republic of the United States of America, which is what you described earlier, that where the Constitution and all that. So there are two separate United States of America. They sound the same, but they operate completely different. And one is subject to the other. You have to understand that. And then outside of that United States is the common law, which had to deal with most of the countries that came out of Britain, so the British Empire, more or less, and there was a few other countries, but the common law is another jurisdiction. And then you mentioned Admiralty. That's another jurisdiction which has to deal with water and shipping and goods on the water, etc. In tandem with that is a jurisdiction that nobody talks about, and that's law merchant. So that's the merchant law, and it's ancient, that was more on the land, and the Admiralty was more on the water. And of course there was crossover because the goods would come from the land in the first place, go on to a ship, shipped to somewhere else, and then back on the land. So there was always this area where one jurisdiction could easily cross over into the other one, and the common law. So those are the overlying jurisdictions. Outside of that is what are called, you call them off-planet jurisdiction or spiritual jurisdictions. And that is evidenced by a book called the Bible, where the King of England has to swear an oath to uphold this contract. So there's a contract between that realm and inside here. So all these jurisdictions, and they keep going on. I don't know how, they probably go on forever. There's no way to know, but we're stuck. We think we're just, we can see only what we can see, what we're shown. So what you have to understand is that same principle where you gave up some of your freedom to go work at Walmart, you have done that in every one of those jurisdictions. So knowingly or unknowingly. So that's why when to get the concept, if you decided to go to your Walmart manager on a Sunday when it's really, really nice sunny day and some great waves were happening at the ocean, you couldn't go to your manager and say, yeah, the US Constitution says I have the right to pursue happiness, and I think I would be happier at the ocean today than coming to work, so I'm not coming. Yeah, see, everybody laughs because it sounds so ridiculous. And it is. But the same concept happens when you're in the courts of the corporation called the United States. That Constitution is not valid in there. It's not applicable in the same way that it's not applicable at Walmart. And that's where people kind of can't understand what's happening. So you have to understand that you have agreed to that and waived some rights, including constitutional rights, to operate in that or to take part in that court system that's in the corporation. So you have to understand those jurisdictions in order to get any kind of remedy. So you understand where you are and where they are and who's subject to who. So you always want to be one jurisdiction, at least one jurisdiction above where your problem is.
When I first heard about this concept, part of the disconnect, first and foremost, obviously, is because it's so confusing, because it's been very intentionally done to be somewhat deceptive, where you had a corporation called the United States. I mean, that in and of itself starts to create confusion. The thing that I like to remind people, because a lot of people have heard of this still now, is the Federal Reserve Bank. A lot of us grew up thinking that that was part of the federal government because it's got federal in the name. But when you understand what it actually is, it's neither federal, it's not really holding any reserves, and it's not a bank, or at least not to you and me. So it's that same concept where people are putting forth these labels on things that we just presume that Missouri means the state that I happen to live in. No, it's a corporation. And so part of the disconnect is that deception. The other disconnect that I had initially when I was first hearing this was, well, what makes Missouri Missouri? Like, isn't it just paperwork? Isn't it just a piece of paper that, okay, so it is a corporation. How does that really affect me, or how's that any different? That's why I think your video was so impactful for me, because it really helped me understand, that there are multiple Missouris, that there are multiple United States, and there's one at a much lower jurisdiction that we are all operating in when we think that we're operating at a expanded out jurisdiction that has certain rights. And so we're claiming all these rights. And to your point, or to your example, it's like claiming the right of, this is unconstitutional, I should be able to go surf today. Like, no, you agreed to come into work, and you have to abide by these rules. And to me, that explains so much of what's going on right now that we don't really get, because how are these people able to do X, Y, and Z? We look at, our Congress people, we go, we all think we're going to go vote and get the next get. It's like, when you understand it's a corporation and they're all selected into it, the voting is just a facade. It really does help unravel the whole thing. And if you're listening to this and you don't quite get it yet, I'll include a link to your video, Cal, where you have the visual examples, because you got to think of it really as a target, and you're the center of that target. You're the bullseye of that target, and each concentric circle going out is a higher jurisdiction that supersedes the jurisdiction within it. Hopefully that mental visual makes sense, but if it doesn't, you can go check out Cal's video. So excellent explanation. How you got there is, again, a whole nother podcast episode. I would like to briefly share with people, though, how you discovered this, because in that video, you also show how you were going into court, you were dealing with a custody issue with your children through a divorce, and you kept essentially getting in trouble, getting yourself in jail, and all of a sudden you started acting a different way, and you saw a very different response. Can you talk about that moment when the judge literally ran out of the room, and what you did differently, and what that aha moment was for you?
It started with, I was coming up against this thing and nothing was making sense. Like, why am I not winning these things? Because I have a really strong case, and I could see it on the judges' faces and all that, but I was still being ruled against, similar to people who want to take the Constitution into the court, and they're going, you can't bring that in here. You're like, well, aren't we in the United States? Like, it was all that puzzling stuff. Like, what's going on in here? So I went to a seminar on commerce, and that's when the light bulb started going off, because I already had some experience, and I had these anomalies that just didn't make sense. Now they started to make sense. It was like, oh, that's what's going on. Oh, that's why they did that. Oh, that's why that guy said that. It was like every hour I was getting more and more of these, oh, I see it now. And so I left there and tried to study what we could. We're still newbies, whoa, and not fully understanding everything. And that's another thing. You want to study, but you don't want to study to the point where you don't take action. You got to take action. I learned more by action than anything else.
Hmm.
So I had these ongoing cases. By that time, I had the divorce child custody thing going. And I also had driving issues because as I was going through the rabbit holes, as you were describing earlier, I found out about the driver's license and the capitalized name and all this stuff. I rescinded my driver's license and wasn't doing the car insurance thing according to the rules here. And so I had two of those cases running at the same time. So in the driving one, I probably appeared 3 or 4 times over, 6, 8 month period, maybe a year. It hadn't really gone to trial yet. They just, keep putting it off. So I did a commercial move according to Commerce. And when we were going to my cases, we wouldn't go in the room until the judge was already in the room, because every time we went in ahead of time, they say all rise, and we wouldn't stand up. And then there was all this, the sheriffs were, yeah. So we just stopped going in until the judge was in. Then you didn't have to bow or anything like that. So anyway, we were sitting out in the hall. My cases were usually called last because they just wanted to kind of clear the courtroom. So we were used to that. So, you have to show up at 9, but your case wouldn't really get called until like 2 or 3 or whatever in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. So a lot of sitting around, and we used to sit and, watch cases. I watched a lot of cases, but sometimes it was just like, I'm just going to sit out in the hall, chat or whatever. So anyway, we're out in the hall and they called the case inside the courtroom, and I wasn't in there because we were outside the door, just outside the door. And so they page it. If somebody doesn't come forward, then they page it into the whole courtroom, like everywhere. So in case you're in the bathroom or whatever, right? So I heard my name over the paging system. We're standing outside. And so, okay, gather up my papers and push on the door to go in. And as we're coming in the door, the judge is running off the bench, like just as if I came in with a gun.
That's different.
Way different than anything I experienced. Yeah, way different than anything I had experienced before. I'd never seen this behavior. And so we weren't.
And sorry, real quick, was this the first time that you walked in after All Rise?
Done that many times. This was the first time I had a commercial instrument based on Commerce. The little bit that I learned at the seminar, we had just enough knowledge, but I didn't wait until I had all of the knowledge. I wanted to emphasize that. So we were experimenting. Let's just see if what this guy said is true.
So real quick, so you, instead of walking into the courtroom under the presumption that I am here to present my case and we're going to have the balance of justice examine this and have the judge, presume right or wrong or guilty or not guilty or whatever, you went into it with, oh, I'm walking into a business. I'm walking into a corporation. Was that no. Okay? Well,
no. So
this is the exact difference.
Yeah. So this is I like when I went through all the rabbit holes and I learned about the capitalized name and all the, how much jurisdiction, all this stuff. I tried all that stuff. I'm not the name. You can't use my capitalized. I did all of that. I tried it all. I was willing to try anything to get out of this oppression that I was in. I was very oppressed for years. So this was just the next thing I was trying. Like, you got to understand that I wasn't who I am today. I am that because of what I did. So it was like, okay, this guy, we went to this thing. I had a lot of aha moments. A lot of things make sense. Let's just see if it works. Because I had a lot of aha moments on birth certificate and all that stuff too. But it was like, man, it wasn't working. I just got arrested. So this was literally, let's try this. The next thing on the list, basically. So we put a bond in on a case that was already running. I'd already appeared on it a couple of times. But this time, the guy ran out of the room.
So the bond was the difference.
The bond was the difference. But what? As I'm walking through the door, I don't know that.
Right.
I just see the guy running off, and I'm like, right. Well, what's happening here?
Okay, very interesting.
Because it looked like he had diarrhea or something. I thought, I'm like he was booking it out of there.
Wow.
And everybody was looking at each other like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Like, in the courtroom, everybody's like, where'd the judge go? And so he's been gone for about 10 seconds or so, and then the sheriff stands up and goes, all rise.
I guess
He's already
leaving.
gone.
Yeah.
Doors closed. Okay, all right. So everybody gets up, and I guess we're taking a break. But there was no break called. They had just called my case, so there was no break happening. The guy ran out. We didn't put it together until later that night. I wonder if he ran off because of what we did.
Mm.
Because everything for me is just coincidence, right? So that's just how I roll. So we went, okay, that's a possibility. Maybe that's what has happened here. So let's try it again. So I had other cases. It started to become very clear that we were headed down the right path because all the judge behavior was just overwhelming, that we were hitting the mark.
So can we zoom out a little bit and just walk through? So you started operating at a higher jurisdiction. Is the bond okay? So what exactly was it about the bond that allowed you to supersede the jurisdiction that you were walking into in the courtroom?
I had unwittingly moved into law merchant. I didn't understand it, but I had moved up a jurisdiction, and now I had insured the case, which means I kind of owned it.
Huh.
And everybody in there was now subject to the amount of money that was being thrown at this thing. You see, whoever has the money has the control in their system.
Right.
So I had stumbled onto this.
And so was the judge liable then, potentially?
There was a potential liability, and he probably didn't even fully understand it, but he knew there was something about this, and his holdings were now on the line on this case, and he didn't want to sit there.
If I remember correctly from the video, weren't there other people in other positions in the local government or whatever that also left their job, or am I mixing that up with a different?
No, not on that particular day, but as we kept doing more and more commerce and I got more and more knowledge, yeah, I saw people all at a federal level step down, provincial level. Many judges either recused themselves, retired, or wouldn't come in the room.
So I've been sort of dropping hints on my social media feeds where I'm letting people know you are much stronger than you realize. You are far more powerful than you realize. Some of that is coming from my spiritual beliefs, but I do think that there may be a connection to this. But anyway, you basically stumbled onto something where you were more powerful than you even realized. And you learned this from the merchant law course that you ended up taking. I love the part of the story where you were trying to do different things. And I think there was at one point where a judge, or maybe it was another attorney or somebody, pulled you aside and was like, keep going, you're on the right track. You got little clues along the way that they saw you trying to do different things, and you got some nudges that, yes, keep going in that direction. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I got nudges from 2 judges and probably about 3 to 4 police officers.
And what was it that you learned in the merchant class that eventually became the epiphany that, oh, this is powerful?
Well, that it exists. There's this, and we weren't really saying law merchant back then. I don't think, but it was this commercial jurisdiction that wasn't admiralty. It was on the land. It's a land thing, and they stopped talking about it a long time ago, pretending it doesn't exist. So most lawyers will say it's a myth, or like, I don't know what you're talking about. Most of the judges had at least heard of it. So there was a discrepancy. So it's being hidden on purpose. Then they turned us all into merchants with the birth certificate. And so then merchant law applies, but we don't understand it. So when you were a merchant class in the Middle Ages, your signature could be turned into money. Put it that way. That's the simplest way to put it. So now, if they've turned us all into merchants and we don't understand that, every time we're signing a piece of paper, it could be turned into money. Not every time, but I mean, they're monetizing the fact that we're merchants, but we don't understand it. So we're signing stuff and they're getting the money from it, not us.
This, I'm sure we're losing some listeners right here who are scratching their heads going, what the hell are you guys talking about? Because this was me when I first heard this. As I understand it, historically, we had the Constitution, at least in America, was gold and silver was what was supposed to be used as the only legal tender to exchange goods and services. Then there came a point where we started to have promissory notes that essentially represented carrying around your gold was too cumbersome. You'd put it into a bank. They'd say, well, here's a piece of paper. Whenever you want, you can bring this paper back. You can get the gold back whenever you want. It's a promise. Here's a promissory note. Well, then we all started using the paper, and the paper became convenient, a lot easier to transport. You don't have to carry around wagons full of your gold and silver, which is heavy and cumbersome. You can have the paper. And then, and I know I'm skipping lots of history here, but eventually they detached the paper from the gold. And I think the other really big thing to note too is that that paper is coming from a central bank, that we're borrowing that from somebody else. So the piece of paper in and of itself is an IOU back to those central bankers. So we all think we have value of this piece of paper when we're all just exchanging. We all owe it back to the puppet master. So what of value do we really have if we have this cash, right?
There is no value to it. It's complete fictitious, but it's more ancient than you think. That's the key to really understanding what's going on. Is this system predates the United States?
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is biblical, even like, isn't this?
I wouldn't say you don't see bills of exchange mentioned in the Bible, but it's from those times.
That's what I meant. Sorry, yeah,
yeah.
The so Roman times and.
Yeah, I mean, going back into Hammurabi times, like the ancient Babylon, they had commercial instruments in clay, and you had a roll, like a little cylinder that had engravings on it. That was your signature. You would literally roll in wet clay debt notes. And this is before they had money. They were still dealing in cattle and grain and actual commodities as far as trading. But when you wanted to represent it, they had it in clay. So they didn't even have money, but they had money concepts. So where did this come from?
So it's my understanding historically for America anyway, that in the 30s, when the government confiscated the gold, I had an epiphany the other day that at the time we normally think we might have heard of that term eminent domain. If you have a house and they want to build a highway, the government has the right to take the house for the greater good to build the highway, but they have to give you something of equal value, i.e. they're going to pay for your house at supposedly fair market value. So when the government confiscated the gold, my connecting the dots was, oh, if they took $10,000 worth of gold, they give you $10,000. Apples to apples exchange, equal value. And the epiphany that I had was that it wasn't that they just took the gold, they took away our entire ability to have legal tender according to the Constitution. And therefore they took away our ability to pay for anything in a way that was constitutional. And then it became our signature that eventually, because the country was bankrupt. I might be skipping around here. I might be messing this up. But
they think that was the third term of the bankruptcy from 1929 to 1999.
And so when the country went bankrupt, there was a meeting and the central bankers said, we'll lend you the money, but what do you have to offer as collateral? And what was proposed was the people. And so essentially at that point in time, we essentially became financial slaves to the system. And it's our signature that is the credit. Is that correct?
Yes.
So when we go in and when you, this is what just blows my mind and that people are discovering right now is that you literally can write on a piece of paper a promissory note. If I said I owe Cal $1 million and I signed my name, that is like handing you, if there was $1 million dollar bill, it's a promissory note. And people are literally taking that and depositing it and actually getting results with that? Or
I would say that's going to be spotty at best because the system is corrupt. That's how it should work. But in practicality, yes, some people are getting those results, others are not. So it's not cut and dry like that. It's not magic paper. But that said, you're correct that our signature is being monetized. So the banks are monetizing it. The clearest way to understand this is look up the definition of a bill of exchange. All it is a writing that has one person owes another person an exact amount of money on an exact date and a signature. And the signature doesn't matter. It just has to have a signature. This is how they were creating money, the merchant class. And that's how the merchant class got rich. That's why the rich families are rich families, because they were doing this kind of money and the rest of us were scratching around trying to live indoors and eat. So
exchange our labor for it.
Exactly. But they had this whole system and they just didn't tell anybody. It wasn't for everybody. It was merchant class only. So around the 30s is when the birth certificates started to come out. Because like you said, how are we going to pay this back? And that's when the income tax act started to come out. And that's why you can't find any law that says pay income tax, because they're not really allowed to do it, but they have to pay the money back. They're in a catch-22. And so the judges are going along with this income tax thing, because if they don't, we're going to run out of money. You got to understand that.
But how would we run out of money if they can just invent it?
Because the banking families have that control over it. The only place to get actual FRNs is at the Federal Reserve, because they're called Federal Reserve notes. But that's a private bank. So if you want to have Federal Reserve notes, which everybody understands and will accept as payment, you've got to borrow them. The government has to borrow them from that institution.
Mm-hmm.
They print them out of nothing, and then they want it all back plus interest. And the way they get it back is through income tax. So if you want to have money in your economy, think about what happened just before the 30s.
I mean, the Great Depression.
Great Depression, because there was no money.
Mm-hmm.
They pulled the money supply back. Nobody could do anything. No, there were no jobs because there was no money to transact with. All you have to do is pull that all back and it shuts the whole thing down.
Mm-hmm. Again, when I first started hearing about this, I was like, it all sounds crazy. Like, I don't have time for that. And it wasn't until somebody showed me how to search my own social security number and see how much it's being traded on the global markets. And so you're literally looking at, and then that was the first thing that got me going, okay, like, it seems like there's a little bit more there. And the more that I looked, the more that I found. The more questions you ask, the more you find that are unanswered, and it just completely opens this. And it does take a while to wrap your head around, because it's intentionally, I think, convoluted and confusing, and they use certain words that you think mean some things, but they actually mean other things. And so it takes some mental energy to actually uncover and untangle all this stuff.
Exactly.
So we can go down the rabbit hole for probably multiple hours and just barely scratch the surface. But I do want to give people some real tangible. It's one thing to just talk about what might be perceived as semantics, or it's quite another thing when you're getting real results, when you're walking into a courtroom and you're seeing changed behavior. And can you give us the quick tie-up of that particular case so that people can see how that affected you? You weren't being thrown in jail anymore. It was quite a different experience. What was the outcome of that case when you started using the bonds?
Well, that case, I abated it because they couldn't answer certain questions, which they should be able to answer, regarding Canadian Constitution. And so it went away. I stopped appearing on it. I said, I'm not coming unless you can answer these questions. And so about a year and a half later, maybe 2 years later, they came and arrested me at work. They took one more shot at it. I had only done the jail time I'd done up to that point, quite a few of them, but it was always just overnight. It was always like less than 24 hours. So they picked me up on a long weekend, knowing that I would have to stay at least 3 nights in an actual remand center, where you put on the prison clothes, and it's a dangerous place. I had not been in there before. So they thought they would take one more run at me. And so I was picked up, I was held without bail, and I was in that remand center, actually 2 remand centers, because of, my friends were bonding and they were flipping me back and forth. But anyway, I was in there for 60 days on this same case. Now that judge was long gone. He had long removed himself, and they had, every time I appeared, it was always a new judge. I'd maybe see a judge twice in a row, and then they had enough. And then they looked for a judge to actually do the actual trial. And so I got this lady, and we found out afterwards she had only been a judge for 3 months. And she was the newest judge in British Columbia. So she got it. She had to take it. And so at the end of it all, my charge was driving without insurance, even though I had bonded properly according to the act. They changed the act, but regardless, I had taken responsibility to indemnify myself on the roads, and wasn't causing anybody any harm. Well, they don't want this getting out, because then everybody will do it. It's a billion-dollar industry, huge money. Everybody has to go through our insurance thing. It's a provincial wide, and on average, back then, everybody was about $150 a month. It's probably closer to $200 to $300 a month now. and times how many cars are in the whole province, start to do the math on that. They did not want what I was
gravy
doing.
chain dry up. Yeah.
No, that is like so much money off of that. So I on the last day, my friends had put in a promissory note, which you had mentioned. So we were getting pretty adept at the commercial instruments by then. I learned more even after all this, but we were a lot more confident because we were really not confident when we went down this road. We were actually very anxious about it, and in a lot of, like, well, I don't know about this. This is, these are big numbers. Are we going to have to pay this at some point? Like, we went through all that. We overcame our own fears and stepped out and did this. So by this time, we were feeling pretty comfortable with it. We're getting the reactions, the judges are running and all that kind of stuff. So my friends put in a habeas corpus and a promissory note, which then she found me guilty. And part of the sentencing was 1 day in jail, but I had already done 60. So she had to give me 59 days credit. So she said, I'm giving you 59 days credit, $1,200 fine, and a 5-year driving prohibition. I didn't want the driving prohibition because I had been in jail for 60 days and I saw guys leave on conditions and then come back in. Within the 2 months I was there, I'm seeing guys go and come back. I'm like, this is a racket. Like, they're just keeping the beds full in here. And so they have these conditions, like you can't go, downtown Vancouver in a certain area where all their friends are. They know they're going to go in there, and then they just pick them up again and bring them back. Because now they got, So I knew that I would not be able to drive for 5 years without being pulled over at least once. It's just not I can't do it. I was good at it, but I'm not, like, that's just. So I knew that I would be in this revolving door going in and out of jail for the rest of my life, really. So I said, I'm not accepting the 5-year driving prohibition. It's going to cause me harm. And the prosecutor's like, what do you, he was like, he'd never seen that before. Somebody negotiating the actual sentence.
Yeah.
And she goes, well, okay, I'll take it off. And the prosecutor's like, again, he's never seen this before. I said, that will cause me harm. And so she took that off. So now I'm left with 1 day in jail and a $1,200 fine and 59 days credit. I knew about the promissory note my friends had put in. So as soon as I heard the word credit, and I'd seen this credit before on somebody else, so it wasn't a surprise to me, but we didn't really know what it was. Another guy had gotten 14 days credit, and we're trying to figure out, like, what is this? Like, how do you get credit jail time? Does that mean you can punch somebody in for free? Or so we pondered it. We tried to find it in statutes, couldn't find anything on it. Like, it was just like, this is just weird. Like, how do you have credit? Jail time credit, like something's like, I've got this thing that I can use. Like
get out of jail
for 14. So it's like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, he can do a crime up to 14 days and it's okay.
Right.
So we never did come to the bottom of it, but now I'm hearing it the second time. So it didn't go past me, is what I'm getting at. I had seen it before. We didn't come to any conclusion on it. But when she said 59 days credit, I went, oh, there's that thing again. And I went, hang on, credit. There's a thing over here that would balance that credit because my friends put a promissory note in. So I went, hey, you just offered me 59 days credit. It has to equal that piece of paper over there that you guys took, that promissory note. And, we bantered back and forth. And then she goes, how much is the promissory note? And I said, 300 million. And she just like, whoa. And I could hear all the lawyers and, in the back, because they all were coming to my case because it was interesting to them. Right?
I'm sure it's very entertaining. Yeah.
So there was always a full courtroom of mostly court staff. Like probably half the room would be lawyers and court staff and previous prosecutors. And I don't know if I saw a judge or a previous judge. I think they would have just watched on video or whatever, but definitely saw, prosecutors that I'd seen throughout the time. So they were all, and so I left there victorious. They owed me $300 million. That turned into another story where, I learned more commerce, just trying to collect that. Now we're at a whole other stage, and I learned a lot through that. So we tried a couple things. They ignored it. Then I went to another seminar, got this other document, like a template that didn't really work, but we studied it intently, looked up all the words in the dictionary. That's another thing. You got to actually put the time in. There's no magic pieces of paper. So once we understood it and adapted it for what we were doing, I got it notarized at the US consulate and sent it in, and it just about blew up the government. So now we're going, oh boy. And this is where politicians and et cetera started stepping down all the way up to the federal level.
Jeez.
So it was a thing that they were dragging me through, and I was just trying to get free of it. And I was trying things. And as we experimented, I started to stumble onto, oh, you're running from that. Okay, what's in there that we need to find out what it is. It was a learning experience by experiencing things, by trying things, watching the reaction, and then going, okay, if you guys are running, then there must be something in here that I need to know more about.
Yeah. Did this go all the way up to the Queen? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes. This all ended up, this whole thing, starting at a driving without insurance, ended up on the Queen's desk.
Cal, talk about being more powerful than you realize.
Yeah. So this is the thing. And I wasn't out to get the Queen. I had no idea where this was going. I was just trying to get free of this monster, which I did. And then once I got free of the monster, and I didn't know I was free of the monster. And, when you leave jail, it's like, okay, am I going to get picked up again? I've never appeared in court since that time on my name. They dropped everything. So that worked, but that took time to it's been probably almost over 10 years now. So I've never brought into court.
Yeah. That's certainly a net effect for you, for sure. So there clearly was something that you've done that directly benefited you. You didn't have to be harassed anymore, obviously spend nights in jail, et cetera. Were there any other net results that you got out of that, like real money in your accounts or real debt release or anything? Okay.
No, but I learned a lot about bills of exchange and commercial processes, commercial instruments, because I saw the clerk of the Privy Council here in Canada. It's an unelected position, but it's really the guy running the corporation. Like it's the guy actually running. So that guy had been the CEO of the Bank of Canada, which is like the Federal Reserve. So he ran the central bank before this, and he'd also been a director at the IMF. So he was at a world level of the central banking system. Now he's running Canada as the corporation. That guy, when we sent him his notice of default on the same thing, going way back to this judge, he left his position with no notice.
Within hours, right?
And he had done a press conference in the morning because he was like, he's the
guy.
Yeah, he's the guy. And everybody knows he's the guy. And so he does press conferences with and he has meetings with the prime minister, daily or every other day. Probably has meetings with the Queen and probably has meetings with the Rothschilds and all. Like, he's that guy. He's one of those guys. So he did a press conference, didn't mention anything about retiring or anything like that. That was in the morning. The mail got delivered around 11 o'clock because we track it. By noon or 1 o'clock, he's grabbed his pencils off his desk and see you later.
Judge is running. He's running. The Queen is uncomfortable. So when I heard your story, one of my biggest takeaways was there's spiritual authority here. And this is a whole nother rabbit hole. We don't have the time necessarily to get into that, but is there not something else going on here on a spiritual level that connects to all this?
Absolutely. So this jurisdiction thing just kept going. So you can see I'm kind of going through the jurisdictions as I'm trying to not drive with insurance. Then it was escalating, and I just kept going. I was motivated by the money, but then going after 300 million turned into, I was led to stop going after the money and go after the Queen. But it was the same process. I defaulted everybody on the money, so I can send it now to the Queen because she can't send it back. That's her trick, is to, nothing to do with me. Talk to them down there. Well, I had already talked to them, and I defaulted them, sent them 3 processes and mail and bills of lading, everything provable. I sent it to the Queen, all the exhibits. It was like about a ream of paper, and it cost me $75 to send it there. And And she got, dropped it on her lap because she has an oath on the Bible. And like the document that I wrote to her was almost all Bible verses based on the behavior of these agents that are underneath her. So she has to take responsibility because she said she would. Otherwise, you can't be the queen. So that's where this all ended up. So that opened up another door of, now I'm starting to send this stuff to people who don't have any apparent oversight, like the top of the UN, the secretary of the UN, the queen. These people, there's not a boss over them. That's apparent. They're at the top of the heap. So anyway, so now I'm sending documents, and I'm talking about these beings called watchers, and now I'm seeing behaviors, knee-jerk behaviors based on, I'm talking about these things in the Bible called angels. And to me, angels, I believe they exist, but I thought, they were kind of like off in heaven somewhere where that is, way off. And maybe they come here once in a while, that kind of thing, on special occasions. But the reactions that I was getting was, no, they're right here, right now, locked and loaded. That's how they were reacting to what I was saying. And I'm like,
wait, sorry, who's locked and loaded?
These beings called the Watchers.
Okay. Jeez. This does get spiritual. Holy shit.
Yeah. So the thing is, I'm just experimenting. I'm just throwing it out there as a lark. Okay, I'm going to say this is before the Watchers, and I said it verbally, so it went out into the universe. And I said that in my document that I've said this out loud, so you understand. And now I'm sending you a copy of what I just said out loud. I'm getting phone calls from police officers that don't have my name. Yeah, don't come to court tomorrow. It's canceled. I'm like, whoa. And he's nervous. And the only thing I did was send to these people that have nothing to do with Canada, really. Phone calls are being made, panic phone calls. Like, I'm sending this on a Monday, and on a Wednesday, an officer is phoning me not to show up on Thursday. And he doesn't have my number. He's phoning my cell number. Like, so you get what I'm saying?
Yeah,
this is something very connected. They could say, phone this number, telling, like, so it's happening at a very high level, but the knee-jerk reaction was unbelievable. So I went, okay, what did that? The only difference I can see is these Watchers. So, okay, this is how I did everything. So what are these Watchers? I need to find out more about that.
Yeah.
So everything was always try something, they panic, and then you go, okay, if they panic, what is it?
There's something there. Yeah.
Like, I need to learn more.
Well, what's the watch? What did you find out with that?
The Watchers are here, and apparently there was other Watchers who were here before who violated their position and actually bred with the daughters of Adam, which then created these beings who are now, their DNA is different, and they are in the positions of banker, king, royal, elite, blue bloods, all these sayings that we kind of know are out there, but we don't specifically know. We always talk about they, and everybody kind of knows what, when you say they, like, yeah, but who are they exactly? Wow. Nobody can articulate it. Now there's something you can actually go, okay, now there is a they are different. They are psychopathic. They are, like, there's a bunch of things. And then you start to see some of the things that happened in history that don't make any sense. And you're going, okay, this is all starting to make sense now. Like, who built those buildings? Who created this complex money system that doesn't make any sense back in Hammurabi time? How did they have these bills of exchange, and how are they transacting these things on paper, and it all made sense and balanced at the end of the day when there was no telephones and no cars? Like, you had to walk apparently, or on horseback, to go from London to Italy. That would take you 3 weeks. And if you didn't get paid, then you had to go back to your notary there, do a protest, then go all the way. Like, something ain't making sense here.
Right.
But the bills exist. The buildings exist.
Right.
They're still around. So they were doing this, but there's something missing there. It's way too complex. And so this whole idea of these other beings being here starts to make sense.
Well, that's what I have discovered, is that there are lenses that you can look at through the world, And what I try to do is I try to find a lens to look at the world where things actually make sense, where these things line up. And like, for example, when COVID first hit, I was thinking like, is this just a money grab? Is this just a corrupt money grab? And you look at the world through that and you're like, okay, some of it makes sense. I can see corruption. I can see who's benefiting financially. But then there were other things that were like ideologically different. I'm like, that doesn't line up. So you kind of continue to try on these different lenses to look at things to where things line up. And as crazy as what you're saying sounds, when I start to look at the world through that lens, things seem clearer. There's dots that you're connecting, whatever. And again, I'm still learning. I'm not quite fully there all the way yet, but I know that I'm learning things that I did not believe 6 months ago, 3 years ago, et cetera. And, here we are. This is what I keep saying to people, a great awakening. There's this sort of undercurrent that everybody knows that we're definitely heading into something and that this is some spiritual great awakening. I keep telling people a great awakening isn't you going, I told you so. See, everybody, I told you. See, I already knew the truth. A great awakening is all of us going, what? Like when you share that kind of stuff, who knows what level of truth it is. Maybe there's a lot more than that. Maybe it's not. I definitely have that visceral reaction of like, holy crap, that's wild. You're getting results from it. That's the telling evidence to me.
This is the thing.
You're poking the matrix and it's responding.
Exactly. That's the thing. It's not theoretical to me. I'll tell you when it's theoretical or my opinion, but all this has been tried over and over. It's repeatable. Not the same exact result, but you get a result from it. It was overwhelming how many times we did commercial instruments and the judges acted crazy. Like it's every time. So there's something there. So what I have found is, as crazy and as fairy tale as it sounds, the biblical story actually fits all the pieces. That there is a Lucifer who wants to overthrow God. That's the underlying court case claim that is being adjudicated here in earth. It's the agreed upon spot. The agreed upon being to settle this claim was Adam. Adam was created and Eve were created to actually settle this old claim. When you put that lens on, everything starts to make sense.
Fascinating.
It is. It's incredible. Why are all the elites, and everybody says this, yeah, they're satanic, they're Luciferian. We throw that word around like, but we don't actually think about it. What does that actually mean?
Exactly. What are they animated by? What is animating their behavior? And if it genuinely is that nefarious, you have no concept of it. So don't sit there and say like, oh, they're satanic or even just evil or psychopathic. If you understand what they're animated by, then you're playing chess on the same board. If you don't assume that, then you lost by admission by not even playing the same game.
Exactly.
And which is why I think words matter, definitions matter, because that's energy and that's intention and that's thought that's in the spiritual realm. And it's so fascinating to see you make these moves and not even know what you're doing, and then see them quickly make all these counter moves, and you're going, oh, I poked the matrix. Okay, what did I just do? I am fascinated by this vein of thought that we're on right now, but I want to leave people with actual practical, tangible things, because you can hear all of this and go, that's horseshit. I don't even know. What are these guys talking about? What we do know is that your methodology that you have now put together in a program called empowermovement.org, and you are getting real results against 5G towers, against chemtrails, correct?
We haven't done any chemtrail ones, but we've done smart meters, vaccination, and 5G. So
there, I think that you're onto something. And I know you know this, but for those that are listening, I feel, have penetrated, poked the matrix, and started to get real results from this crazy, nefarious force that we feel all oppressed underneath. I think right now people are starting to uncover the real truth behind the vaccines. A lot of us saw the shenanigans before, but there was, I think, the majority of people that got caught up in it. There's now starting to see it. And your approach and your methodology and your spiritual bedrock that you're standing on is getting real tangible results. So can you explain real quick, like with the smart meters and the 5G towers, some of the things that your movement has been able to retract?
Yeah, so those are weapons, the 5G in particular, the vaccines and the spraying in the air and the smart meters. They work in tandem, but we've separated them out because people can't, it's too much to
They're
see
not
that.
looking at the right lens. They're not looking at it through
Yeah,
the,
and it's hard, and it's you have to kind of grow into that. You can't just
Yep.
go, oh yeah, you know, we're all being
Yep.
killed. But anyway, they are weapons, but they're being deployed commercially. So as you saw with the vaccine, they were advertising, they were selling it, they were getting us to agree to it. They were not banging down your door, holding you by the neck and jabbing you like that. You lined up and you went and got it. They were pushing it commercially like they push cigarettes or any other thing. So they're doing everything commercially. They're selling the smart meter. Oh yeah, your bills are going to go down, and it's clean energy and green, and everything they're doing is selling. 5G, you can't go anywhere without seeing a 5G billboard or a 5G advertisement on TV or radio. They're selling it. It's like, yeah, you want to have this thing, but it's actually a weapon. This is the first time they've ever done like a world war where they want to reduce, big population, big reset kind of thing, where they've gotten our agreement. Everything else has been very in your face military. This is military grade stuff, but they're selling it to us. So we're agreeing to the weapons of our own demise. So because of what I went through, going back to the driving thing and everything that I experienced, I see exactly what you're doing. Most people can't see it. So, but I'm like, I get it. I see exactly what you're doing. You're doing all the things that I learned through my, 15 years of pounding on this thing. So I went, yeah, we can counter this. So this is the first time in history where the general people can actually stop a military campaign. Because like if you just use the Second World War as an example, when tanks were coming down your street of your village and cannons and guys with guns, you couldn't walk up to them and go, yeah, we have an ordinance here in our town, signed by the mayor here. Yeah, you can't have that kind of weight on our streets.
Yeah.
Not going to work. You see, this is the same thing we do in court when we're bringing in the Constitution and we're banging our head against a wall. We just don't get it. So this is the first time where it's now commercial. Everybody can renegotiate that contract offer, and we get them on the poopy side of a law merchant transaction, where if they can't prove that these things are safe, 100%, and they can't because you cannot prove a weapon safe ever. You try and show me, prove that a gun is safe. There's nothing to do with gun laws. Prove a gun is safe. You cannot. It's not designed to be safe. It's designed to shoot a projectile out at high volume. That's going to cause damage to either property or life or whatever. Like that is not a safe thing.
What are the smart meters doing that's weaponized?
Smart meters are sending off EMF and they're spying on you. So that it's a proximity thing. And we have reason to believe, which is hard to prove, that it's a targeting mechanism for satellite or something that's causing these fires. They can actually target one house in particular and not the next ones, and then maybe the one after that. Like we've seen evidence of a cul-de-sac with 8 houses to white dust and one house pristine. Like how is it convenient? Yeah. So we think that the smart meters are also a targeting device. So, they're all weapons, and it's the proximity place where they can spy on you, and they know what's going on in your house. They know what's going on with any of your smart devices. All that information is pumped out automatically through wireless. So that's that one. The 5G is, they've gone into frequencies that were military alone. So they have crowd dispersing frequencies that'll burn your skin, frequencies that will change the oxygen so you just keel over, like on and on and on. It's a full-on weapon system. But we think it's, I'm going to get fast downloads on my phone.
Faster YouTube video,
yeah.
There's so much evidence of, the whole Sherlock Holmes thing. He was able to crack the case because the dog wasn't barking. I don't know if you know that Sherlock Holmes went to go figure out who the murderer was or whatever, and there was a dog on the premise, and the fact that the dog wasn't barking led him to believe that the murderer was somebody that the dog knew. So that the non-barking was the evidence. There is so much non-barking that's happening that it's one of the examples, and I'm not purporting that this is absolute rock solid evidence, but it's like there was such a rush to get to 5G. We were 3G and oh, cool, 4G's coming up. Where's 6G? Why are we not? Where's the next level? Well, how about not faster YouTube videos? I want them even faster. Like all of a sudden we just stopped. It's just 5G. It's like those kind of things that if you're looking for the non-barking dog, there's a lot of that's out there that's like, why is that? That doesn't make sense.
Well, they had to add a lot of infrastructure as well, too. So it's not an upgrade. They change something. They have to have repeaters every few hundred feet. It's like, how is this better? How is this more like something's not adding up here? Why do you have to have more stuff out there? If it's actually getting better, you should have less stuff. You're adding more stuff, which means it's not better, it's weaker, or something else is going on. That's the thing. Like there's a lot of questions about it. And of course they want you distracted with anything else, but don't look at what's going on your street.
And so your community, your movement has effectively gotten 5G towers taken down, or is that still a work in progress? Or
we have, but mostly because we've only been launched for about 6 months, what we're seeing is the same thing that I saw, people stepping down. So we're starting to crack the matrix and put dents in the dam and little holes in the dam. So like the head of the CDC who just stepped down recently. See, nobody knows. They see her stepping down in the news and all that. It's all big news. They don't know that she got a document
from Empowerment. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah. So there's quite a few people that it's not apparent what's going on. The coincidences are adding up, like getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Here's a quick theory. We've seen that there seems to be a satanic element amongst, certainly in Hollywood, that's almost obvious. And certainly within the music industry, there's other speculation that may go up into higher realms of politics and maybe corporate executives, et cetera. Child trafficking is a whole nother thing, organ trafficking. People are starting to see that. One thing that we're seeing is this, they're telling us what they're going to do before they do it. And part of my thought process has been like, why would they do that? And then you learn a little bit about what animates them. And if they need to tell you what they're going to do before they do it, what is that? It is an offer, like you're talking about. It is a commercial agreement, essentially. And this goes to the spiritual realm. And the only way that you can tune into that frequency, for lack of a better way of saying it, is if you tune into that frequency, is if you accept that offer. But if you see that offer and you say, I decline that offer, or here's my counter offer, et cetera, there is no way for them to have spiritual jurisdiction over you, because your intention and your spiritual authority rejects it, sees it, says, no, thank you, and then rejects it. So is it not plausible that they keep saying, there's going to be another virus, there's going to be a cyber attack, there's going to be this. Is it not plausible that we could say, oh, wait a second, we collectively see what you're doing, we collectively decline it. No, thank you for your offer. Go the fuck away. We have other things that we want to do. We don't want that. Is that not possible? Is that part of the intention or the mission of the movement?
Yeah, it is.
To grow the numbers to the point where
we have a clear group of people operating in the private, away from their system, and we're all have the same mindset. But you can't just get everybody to do that, like out of the blue. Yeah. So they have to come through it somewhat. So that's what we're doing at a high level, and everybody's starting to experience this in other aspects of their lives as well. As they grow personally, they're starting to understand what's going on in their lives and what their signature is doing and not doing, and they're making choices and doing experiments and starting to get the same kind of results on the matrix. So, as we make this thing grow, that's what we're trying to do, is get rid of this whole thing on a deep level.
Yes, I have seen a lot of changes. You have websites that all of a sudden completely are rearranged. You can't find the same information that you were using before. And it's my understanding that there is a very large growing movement that people are learning this stuff and they're starting to poke the matrix. And so they're moving things around it to make it harder and, confiscate and make it more difficult. Well, Cal, I could talk to you for another several hours. I know we're sort of short on time, but I do want to let people know I'm a member of your program. I signed up and I've started to go through the content. Excellent video material in there. And it gives you we've talked on a fairly philosophical, spiritual, theoretical, some of this stuff. And it's helpful to understand that, because then you can, we even talk about the lenses and see how this is what's actually going on. But your website doesn't necessarily get as much into that. There obviously is a spiritual element to it, but there's a lot of practical, like, hey, if you have a smart meter, this is what you need to do. Here's the paperwork, here's the notice of liability, here's where you send it, et cetera. So I'm working my way through that. What are the top level things that people who are interested to go down this rabbit hole and better uncover what's going on? You mentioned bills of exchange, merchant law. What are some other the top level categories people need to look into to start to put these puzzle pieces together?
Law merchant is you got to understand law merchant. At least, the spiritual end is above all that, but the law merchant is they purposely hidden it. And I don't think I have to repeat that or explain that anymore. If they purposely hid something, you want to look at that.
Mm-hmm.
It'll open up the door to see things from a different lens, as you put it. And because they turned us into merchants with the birth certificate, they can't say we can't act as merchants. We couldn't act as merchants because we weren't of those families and of that noble status and all that. See, that wasn't available. They made it available, but they didn't tell us what it was, so they could take advantage of us being merchants. So this is the key. So what I'm telling people is, they turned us into merchants, and you can get all upset about that, or you can go, okay, you turned me into a merchant, watch this. Here's my signature on a piece of paper that I'm in control of. You don't have control of it.
Yeah.
Writing certain things on here. Here's my signature.
We're playing by your rules here. Yeah. I think the King of England is going to be hearing from a lot of people soon.
So this is here's a bill of exchange. It looks very similar to ones of 300-400 years ago. I mean, obviously it's used a printer. Everything else was handwritten, but in those days. But this is it, and it's this is to Justin Trudeau. He's the debtor on this. Can't say it's not real. And I've watched a guy who, like I said, this is the thing. When you see a guy who used to work at the IMF and used to run the central bank of a country, and he runs
tuck tail and run,
he knows more than I do about it. I don't need to know anything else, really.
Yeah, you're on the right path.
He knows it's real.
What resources do you recommend to study law merchant more? You have some.
We have quite a few resources that we put on our website. You can go through those. There's lots of books and treatises that I've read. And those treatises, because they're essays in and of themselves, have bibliographies in them. And if you just went on our site and grabbed two of those, you'd be in rabbit holes for,
Okay.
You would be able to go any direction you wanted.
And just to be clear, because some people might be asking, you're obviously out of Canada, I'm in the US. These more or less operate the same, at least conceptually, or are there significant differences that I, as a state national, would have to look into that's different than you, or is it relatively the same?
Law merchant is above countries.
Okay. So anybody that's listening to this in any country can go to law merchant and get real tangible.
Law merchant is it's international. It's a jurisdiction. It's capturing all of the corporate countries. Put it that way. So once you get out of the United States, law merchant grabs United States, Canada, England, Hong Kong.
Yeah, it explains why we're in this global mess and why, like, George Floyd gets murdered or killed, either way, depending on how you look at it. And in Europe, there was defund police movement. I'm like, wow. All this, when you see the concert that's orchestrated on a global scale in unanimity, it's like there's clearly a puppet master here. Like, who is doing all of this? And it's corporate. It's all corporate control.
Yes, and or spiritual control. But the whole, the idea of countries is not. It doesn't belong here. We were born into it, but if you look at nature, birds and animals don't understand borders. They just fly over, like, oh, okay, whatever. We've been told there's a border there, And we believe it, but there actually isn't. There is no such thing as a country. There's no such thing as money. No living species in Earth pays to live here, except men and women. Why is that?
Mm-hmm. We'll leave it on that. Dangle that one out there. Let people noodle on that one for a little bit. Now, this has been such a great call. I so appreciate your perspective. And thank you for getting the CDC person out of there and knocking on the Queen's door for us.
Yeah.
What a trip, man. What a journey. Who knew? You were just trying to see your kids a little bit more. And the next thing you know, you're taking on Peyton.
That's how it happened, man. I had no idea.
Oh
If you told me 20 years ago I'd be on an interview with you or anybody, I'd be like, who am I? Like, I don't know. No, it's just literally dragged through it, basically.
Yeah. Well, but there is an acceptance on your part to say, okay, I do have spiritual authority.
Nope. There was definite choices. I gotta make that clear. I made choices. Yeah. They were clear choices, and I knew I was making them.
I want to say, because I see people that are getting into this and they're wanting the fast track to like, just make my bill go away. And I'm like, you're not going to get it, because at any point in time, you're going to get challenged. You won't know what ground to stand on. You'll have no way to actually stand with authority. You have to go through and learn this and be able to stand on spiritual bedrock. So when they challenge you from multiple angles, you can go back to them. And in this case, as merchants, beat them at their own game and or supersede them with higher authority. Yep. Amazing. So one last time, it's inpowermovement.org. Awesome work that you're doing, Cal. Thank you so much for your time today. Brilliant call.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Wired for Impact. If you're interested in creating and expanding your impact, be sure to visit us online at impactnow.com.